Last but not least, fundamental number 13, which is vocal health. And we cannot stress this enough. This is super, super important. And I think it's really overlooked by a lot of singers. Again, it goes back to I talk all the time, so I can sing all the time. And we don't on a daily basis consider if our vocal cords are functioning well or if they're healthy. You know, people will shout all the time. And you know that it's interesting. The number one people in the country for vocal injuries are actually school teachers.
Oh, I believe it.
Because they have to talk so loud over the kids all day long, and their voices are just hammered. They are the most likely to go in for surgeries and to work with a speech pathologist and get their voices back in shape because they throw their voices so much. So it's interesting that even in your daily life of speaking, how much do you consider the health of your vocal cords?
And this is something that's super important because we see this a lot, especially with singers who have been in bands for a while.
Oh,
they don't come in to take lessons or to get help until their voices are
completely destroyed.
Until they're destroyed. And it's like you wish that they would come in to establish fundamentals 1 through 12, right?
Yeah.
But instead they come in at this point. And that's okay if you're at this point, but
yeah, we can totally rehabilitate voices. We do it all the time. About half of my clients right now are people that we are fixing voices for. And it's because they are extreme singers, right? They're doing really raw sounds. They're doing screaming techniques, and they're doing their rock singing, and a lot of musical theater performers sing as well. And so, yeah, it's great to make sure you have your foundations together before you're going into that. But we totally understand that you might already be at that place where you're coming off a tour with your voice just completely wrecked. And so it's good to know going into life,
right,
how to take care of your vocal cords. So let's talk about some of that stuff.
Okay. One thing that I want to just kind of knock out of the way real quick.
Sure.
Are some of these myths that we run into when it comes to younger kids.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot.
I remember one time I was talking to a telemarketer on the phone, and he asked me what we did or what I did, and I told him, and he's like, oh, yeah, I have a daughter who's 7, and he asked, but I've heard I shouldn't get her into voice lessons until her voice has changed. Yeah, and so he's like, yeah, so I heard that I shouldn't get her into voice lessons until she's like 12 or 13.
Yeah, and like with boys, they're like not until they're 15 to 17 years old, right? Because their voice has to be completely changed and settled. That's a myth. Boom. Let's debunk that because that is a total myth. That being said, all singers should get into good habits at a really young, as young as they can. Yeah. Right. And what we're talking about right now with these fundamentals is just good habits in singing. It's coordination building. It's not something that's damaging or straining to the voice. So that's something that we have to make sure we differentiate with, because if your vocal coach is saying that they can't work technique with you until after the voice change, then we should probably take a good look at that, because it's probably because it's hard on the voice. And if it is hard on the voice, avoid it as long as possible.
Right. Then it's not really good technique.
It's not great technique. So some coaches won't work with young kids because they just don't want to work with young kids. That's a totally different thing. They might be an excellent coach, but they just don't like working with small children. That's fine. That's their prerogative. But if they're giving you the whole thing about small children should not take voice lessons until after the voice change because it's not good for their voice, that is bull. Like that, it's not true if the technique is good.
So that's like somebody saying, like, if you wanted to become a professional basketball player and you imagine this from the time you're a kid, it's like, well, we shouldn't work on your jump shot technique until after you've gone through your growth spurt, because your limbs are going to change and your strength levels are going to change.
Yeah,
and
you
it's
going
to be a little different anyways.
Right.
So we might as well not even establish anything until you've gotten beyond that point.
And we don't want to damage your child muscles.
Right.
It's like, what? That's like saying for ballet that you shouldn't start taking ballet lessons until you're 13 years old.
Right.
If you don't start ballet lessons until you're 13 years old, you are so behind the curve. There's no way you're going to be a prima ballerina. Like, there's a very slim chance.
Right.
Because you have to train that core musculature and the coordination and the flexibility from such a young age. Guess what? Your voice is the same way. Okay? Where I feel like, I will say this, though, with voice, I feel like you can pick it up at a later age than something like dance, right? But it is not bad for a small voice to start doing it, as long as we're focused on good habits, balanced singing, relaxation, natural coordination of the voice. We're not forcing or pushing anything. Everything is just nice and fluid and beautiful. And if that is the case, you can start at any age. Because we also have elderly people come in here whose voices are in shambles because maybe a woman's gone through menopause or something like that, and she's not feeling it anymore, which is similar to going through the voice change at a young age. And we put our voice back together. So that happens all the time. But just understand that age thing with the voice change is a total myth. It's not true. And if your coach is saying that to you, and they're saying that it can be damaging to start voice lessons before then they're not teaching proper technique.
Right, because proper technique is more about coordination and
healthy
control.
And I'm not going to say proper technique. I actually think healthy technique.
Healthy technique. Sure, because you can learn proper technique for yelling as loud as you can and blowing out your voice.
Yes, you can, which I did at age 10 with my first vocal coach.
So that being said, a lot of times we hear about getting vocal nodules. Like I think Adele had to take a year or two off where she went on vocal rest, right, to get these
a lot of singers have to do that. Yeah.
So what causes that, and then how do you kind of avoid that? And I know we're going to talk more about that in the tip section, but generally, from a general perspective, what tends to cause that?
So there's a lot of different pathologies that can happen in the vocal cords that are very damaging. So the hemorrhage is usually the first thing that occurs, and really that's anytime you lose your voice. Your vocal folds, they're muscle, ligament, and then over the top is this mucosal lining that's kind of like the skin on the inside of your mouth. You can kind of feel that. It's just this beautiful little piece of skin, mucosal lining that covers that. And they're very sensitive. Feel the inside with your tongue, feel the inside of your mouth and how fine that is and how sensitive that is. That's your vocal folds. You have 2 of them. And if you are not balancing your vocal cords or vocal folds properly, like we've talked about with the air and the muscle, then it causes a lot of friction between the 2 of them and tension. And what that can do is first we get the hemorrhage where like you actually have blood vessels pop in your vocal cords that make them puffy, okay? Or maybe they don't pop, but they just get puffy and swollen. All right.
And so that's what's happening when I'm yelling at a football game.
Yeah, and then you lose your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hemorrhage where you're swollen. It's like spraining your ankle and it swells up, right? With the blood. It's the same thing when there's too much tension on the vocal cords or they're smashing together or they're rubbing incorrectly. We want them to be oscillating evenly. And if there's too much friction, then we're in trouble. And that, nodules can be caused by a bunch of different things, but typically the ones that you're talking about from over singing or singing unbalanced, from shouting or anything like that, it's basically over time, because of all that extra friction and tension, you get little calluses on your vocal cords, just like you would on your hands if you rub them together over and over. Or for my weightlifters out there, you get calluses on your palms, right, from holding the weight. It's the same thing. So you actually get these little bumps on your vocal cords that are calluses. That's a nodule. And what that does is it prevents the vocal cords from closing all the way. And then you get someone who has to start talking kind of rough and wispy all the time. Or they might have, like you hear about people talking about smoker voice, right? Mm-hmm. And they have that very distinct kind of growl in the voice or gruffness in the voice where there's always a little bit of raspiness. That's because the vocal folds can't adduct all the way or they can't close all the way. So that's all a nodule is. There's 2 different types of nodules. There's the soft nodules and hard nodules. Soft nodules are when they're kind of new and they haven't hardened yet. Then the good news about a soft nodule is that most of the time, or if not all the time, we can get rid of it with just good vocal therapy and with some exercises and vocal care. So that's nice. I've seen those pop up all the time, and it takes about a month of good care and regiment, and then we get rid of them. So that's nice. The problem is when you have a hardened nodule, if you've had raspiness in your voice for a long period of time, it's difficult to project, you have to clear your throat a lot, all those things. Then the only real way to get rid of a hard nodule, meaning like a callus that is just solidified, it's bump and it's just there, is to get it surgically removed. And that's a lot. It's tricky. So does that answer your question about the nodule?
I think so, but
it does happen a lot.
Right.
It does happen a lot for a lot of singers who are making big extreme sounds.
Right. So to take this a step further, if you're going to be a professional singer, are nodules unavoidable because you're going to be singing all the time? Like if you're somebody that's out there singing all the time and these nodules are like calluses, are they actually avoidable over the long run?
Absolutely, they're avoidable. Yeah, if you have really great technique and if you have exercises to help you ease out of your shows at the end of the night to help kind of push the reset button if you have overworked your voice, you know, you can definitely avoid getting hemorrhages and nodules. There's also a lot of other pathologies that pop up, but those are the main ones that we see for singers. You can definitely avoid that with good vocal care. And the other thing you have to consider is just like we talked about our athletes and our dancers and everybody else who uses their body at an elite level, because you're talking about elite performers when
Sure.
you talk about that level. You have to train your stamina just like you do everywhere else in your body. You can't go out and be an amazing competitive sprinter and be successful at it and not have an injury unless you take care of that and work up to it and build the stamina for that, right?
Right.
And so, and you keep yourself in good health. And that's the same thing with our singers. If you build up that stamina and if you build up that longevity, you can definitely do it for the long haul without having one of those pathologies pop up, for sure.
So say you do, right?
Okay, yeah.
If you get to that point where your voice is damaged,
Yeah.
what's the next step? Where do you go from there?
Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is get you in with a really great ENT who can scope your voice. So it's really easy, guys. They spray this little stuff up your nose that numbs it, and they stick this little thing up your nose, and they look at your vocal cords while you're talking. You're completely awake. It's not painful at all. It's an outpatient thing. It's not a big deal. It's like getting a checkup. And they actually look at your vocal cords and they scope them and see what's going on and see if there's an actual pathology that's happening in the vocal cords. Because we can also have something that's called muscle tension dysphonia, where there is so much tension in the vocal cords that they're just having a really hard time working at all, and they get really puffy and swollen. And so there's a lot of, with that though, we just need a good exercise to alleviate that. And the straw exercise is really, really good for muscle tension. So they can see what's going on in the voice. They can see if there's any issues or anything like that happening. The interesting thing about nodules too is one of the biggest causes of hemorrhages and nodules is actually acid reflux.
Huh. That's
right?
interesting.
Yeah. Because think about it, and most people actually have acid reflux and don't even realize it's silent.
Oh, I know I do. It's not silent.
Because especially in Americans, like we have not the greatest diet across the board. There's way too much fast food and fried food and every kind of thing and sugar in the diet. But most people walk around with acid reflux and don't realize it. And especially if they're not singers, because they're not realizing how it's affecting their throat. But as you lay down at nighttime, if you have reflux, that acid comes up and it actually gets on your vocal cords. So if you are a consistent throat clearer and you notice that your vocal cords are just thrashed in the morning and it's hard to talk, you have a froggy throat, you feel like you have to constantly swallow and it's hard to talk and they're puffy, you likely have reflux. And that's a bummer. But it's definitely something fixable with good nutrition and an acid reducer. So the reason why acid reflux causes nodules is because they make the vocal cords very puffy. They get puffy, they get that hemorrhage that we were talking about, and then they are rubbing together extra. There's extra friction because they're thicker and bigger, and then we get a nodule. So a lot of the nodules I've seen lately, people who've come in with nodules, it's been mostly because of something like acid reflux, but it also can come from like having really bad bronchitis and coughing for a long time and being inflamed or having laryngitis. Like all those things can actually stimulate that problem too.
So we have a lot of tips that we're going to give you guys for this.
Yeah.
But any last thoughts before we move on to that?
Just consider that as a vocalist, you are an athlete in a sense, okay? Because if you're at this level where you're training your vocal cords and you're this focused on having all of these elements come together, you need to treat your body like an athlete treats their body. If you want optimal performance from your body, no matter where it is in your body, we need to be considering that we're drinking enough water. We're training on a consistent basis. You don't see Olympic weightlifters walk in and pick up a bunch of weight without training every single day. Right? So if you want to be elite at anything, training and practicing is consistent. You want to make sure you're getting enough rest because your voice is the first thing that goes if you're tired, right? We're just taking care of your body. Good nutrition, tons of water, all of that stuff. And if you show up for your body, your voice will show up for you all the time. If you're a person who's not consistent with your voice, if it goes in and out all the time, you need to look at the way you're living and maybe see if there's one of those things that's out of alignment that you can adjust to make sure that you're just having a healthy way of life and, optimal performance through your whole body. And one last thing too is the first thing we do because you asked me what happens when people get nodules or they come in with damaged voices, the first thing we do is send them into an ENT. And if they need to have surgery, we get it out of the way. But if not, we send them into rehabilitation. We work as a team with the ENT, and I'm a vocal specialist, so we're working as somebody, like I know all the vocal exercises and a way to take care of a voice to rehabilitate. And then we usually team up with a speech pathologist as well to make sure that you're getting the speech patterns that you need to help readjust your voice. So it's not the end of the world. It's definitely fixable if you have something going on. But the ideal is that we prevent it with all of our good technique and good patterns and habits and with all the tips we're going to give you next.
All right.
Let's do it. I have a whole checklist of vocal health tips that we're going to run through. So let's just go through it real quick and give you kind of an overview of all the things that you can be considering to keep your voice super healthy. So the first thing is obviously have good vocal technique, right? If you're singing all the time and you're doing things that are damaging to your voice, you are going to hurt your vocal cords. And eventually you're going to have to get some kind of surgery or go on vocal rest, see an ENT and all of that. So if we can prevent that and make sure that we're just singing healthy from the beginning, awesome. So we're looking for good vocal technique. We're also looking for proper warm-ups, things that can really make sure that your voice is stretching out and getting all of its training and then also just feeling good. Sufficient sleep and rest. The funny thing is if you don't sleep well, your body just doesn't respond well. And that's every part of your body. But I've found, and this is a personal thing, that when I don't sleep, the first thing to go is my voice. I just notice it's really heavy and really froggy and it just doesn't want to hold together. It doesn't want to work. So make sure you're getting a lot of sleep and rest. Hydration. Everybody talks about hydration and water. Okay, let's talk about water. Aim to drink half your body weight in ounces of water per day. That is a lot of water, guys. So you do the math, half your body weight, that many in ounces, okay? I always tell my students if they haven't been drinking a lot of water and it's not something they're used to doing, aim for a gallon of water a day and then go from there, okay? Hydration takes at least an hour to get through your body. So once you take a drink of water, it's going to go all the way through your body before it gets back to your vocal cords. And it usually takes about an hour to cycle through your body. So if you are super thirsty and dry in your throat and it's all sticky and you take a drink of water, it's going to take a full hour to get to those vocal cords, or it can take up to an hour. So make sure that you're really drinking water regularly, sips of water throughout the day so that your hydration stays in your body. Another really good thing to do with hydration is inhale steam, like in the shower. If you're vocalizing in the shower, that's a really good, healthy place to be vocalizing because it gets all that nice steam in there. Or if you use a nebulizer and get some nice steam on through there. So that's another really good way to get hydration to the voice. So then the next thing is, and this might be really sad for some of you, avoid caffeine, alcohol, and carbonation. I know, all the fun things, right? The reason why is because they cause inflammation and dryness. And so either avoid them, or if drinking them, be very cautious of also drinking a lot of water so that you can make sure you're staying hydrated and rehydrating after those things go in and cause inflammation and dryness. So nutrition is the next thing. Notice how foods affect you. I think it's so easy for us to just continually eat and eat things that taste good and not pay attention to how our body feels after we eat. And so most of us walk around with some form of acid reflux, which really, really affects the voice. And especially if you're eating spicy foods before bed, that can really affect you. A lot of people get acid reflux at night and they don't even realize it. And that acid comes up our throat, gets near our vocal cords, and it really inflames everything. So if you're waking up every morning having to clear your throat and having really bad froggy throat and everything is super, super dry and burny and you're not sick, it's probably because you have reflux. So maybe go get that checked out. Let's see. Smoking is the next one. Another thing that's going to be sad for some of you. It's the worst thing you can do for your voice. The worst thing. And I know we've talked a lot about smoking in our history and in our pop culture. But as a singer, I think it's really important for you to be informed on the fact that smoking is literally the worst thing you can do for your voice. So it also leads to worse health conditions, obviously. But what it does to your vocal cords is it actually burns your vocal cords. So it's not just like, oh, it's passing over them and it irritates them. No, it burns them. It can actually burn them. And you can see pictures of this if you go on Google and look up pictures of, vocal folds after they've been scoped, after they've had, inhaled weed or cigarettes. It's really gnarly. So here's the thing you have to understand too. There's different degrees of heat depending on what you're smoking. If it is weed, it's the hottest. And you can get instant boils on your vocal cords. Like it gets gnarly. Mid heat is your cigarettes, but it again really inflames things. Your vocal folds should look pearly white. And after inhaling cigarette smoke, they look brown or yellow. So that's something to consider too. And then they get blisters. And then even doing a vape can really inflame your vocal cords because really they're just meant to have air passing over them. So anytime you have anything but that wonderful oxygen going over your vocal folds, it's going to irritate them and inflame them. So yes, it is safer to vape, but it's not ideal. Okay. So the other thing too is with the smoke and the nicotine and everything else that we smoke going over the vocal folds, it really dehydrates them. So you're hearing a lot of this dehydration problem. It's the number one problem that singers face. And so we want to have that beautiful mucosal lining on your vocal cords just nice and smooth. So we want to really avoid all the things that really inflame the vocal cords and cause dehydration. And so if you can start to kind of keep these things in mind as you go on throughout your day, and if you're having problems with your vocal health, kind of go through the checklist and see if these are things that you are or are not doing.
We hope you guys are enjoying the Fundamentals of Singing video series here on YouTube. If you guys want more free resources on how we help our artists here at Invictivox, please check out the Invictivox Radio podcast on YouTube or any major podcast platform.